It is 8 o'clock, so let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for your blessings to us. We ask, Lord, you be with us. Help us in our Bible study tonight. Help us as we look at this information. Help to be able to communicate it clearly and be able to think clearly in what we need to say. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, thank you for coming back. And those of you who are returners, thank you for joining us. I know some people will join on the recordings later, and we welcome you as well. I keep saying I'm going to get the old ones uploaded on YouTube, and I haven't. I tried. I tried. I had some technical difficulties. So I have about 4 or 5 I need to upload, so a lot of this series. 1 Corinthians is completely uploaded. So if you're interested in older ones, all of the Bible studies up until about a month and a half ago are uploaded onto YouTube under Allegheny Apologist. And we'll be getting these ones. I'll get them up sometime. Feel free to make comments during the Bible study. I enjoy having some feedback, and we'll try to respond to it as we go. If you want to comment on the videos later, that's fine as well. Disclaimer, neither my employer nor my church take any responsibility for anything I say, and Stevie's employer and church do not take any responsibility for what he says, and neither does his father. Welcome, Brenda. Welcome, Albertsons. It's good to have you here tonight. We are working on a series on the age of the earth. We looked at theological triage, looking at where this fits into overall theology, and then we did the chronogenealogies, which I think are really exciting. We looked at the theological perspective, the theological implications, and we looked at the scriptural arguments, and now we're getting ready to go to the scientific arguments. I watched a video of another debate on the age of the earth, and somebody's like, why did you spend so much time in the Bible? The science arguments are the really powerful ones. And I will just say, I think it's good that we started with scripture first, as far as what does the Bible say, because the Bible is actually more authoritative than science. Scientific data has to be interpreted, and in the process of interpreting, there becomes some level of uncertainty. And so it is good to start with the biblical data first. But there is a lot of scientific evidence. Real quickly, as we get started, I do want to lay out kind of what the question is. When we're talking about the age of the earth, or the age, it isn't just the earth. If you are an evolutionist and uniformitarian, the Big Bang, the date that you'll typically see is 13.8 billion years ago. 13.8 billion years ago. The Earth is much younger, about 4.5 billion years. Life, I have a number of 3.7 billion years. That depends a little bit on some of the data. It's flexible. Dinosaurs, which is one of the fossils that everybody seems to enjoy talking about, are between 250 and 66 million years ago. Humans don't come along until about 200,000 years ago. Civilization maybe 10,000 years ago. So if you're looking at the Earth and the universe and the solar system, we're talking billions of years. Dealing with fossils and the rock layers, you're dealing with millions up to billions of years. If you're a creationist and you're following a biblical time scale that we've tried to lay out from the chronogenealogies and then from the biblical arguments, creation is about 6,000 years ago. The flood would be about 4,500 years ago, 4,500 years ago, which would mean dinosaur fossils and human fossils would also be about 4,500 years ago. Of course, humans and dinosaurs both were created 6,000 years ago, but we wouldn't expect to find pre-flood fossils, most likely. One of the reasons I want to mention that is because when we're looking at the scientific arguments, we're not splitting hairs. We are not looking at little differences. We're talking about estimates that are many orders of magnitude different. The difference between billion and thousand is 10 to the sixth. We were talking literally a million times longer. And so when we get numbers, I'll try to keep the numbers clear, but when we're looking at numbers, part of the value of it is the fact that we're not even close. It's 6,000 years versus 4.5 billion years for the Earth and solar system, almost 14 billion years for the universe. It's a huge difference. What I'm going to present tonight, and with Stevie's assistance, good evening, Aaron. With Stevie's assistance is some of the scientific arguments. I'll probably finish it next week. These are what I think are the best young Earth arguments. There are other ones. You will find a lot of young Earth dates. You can get good on a creationist site, and they'll just list 50, 60 different ones. But I'm trying to go with the ones that I think are the more impactful. There are a couple of ones that are really strong old Earth scientific arguments. I'll deal with those another time. That's specifically the stars and the Big Bang, and we'll deal with that in a separate context. But we will deal with it. So if you are concerned about that, we will get to it. Okay.
So
you have any comment before we get started?
Yeah, so the G stands for a billion?
Giga is a billion.
Yeah, okay, so it's not a gazillion years.
That's not gazillion, it's giga. They can't see my notes. Yes, I have this as GY, giga years, because I teach metric system to 9th and 11th graders, and so it's a lot shorter than writing it out. So yes. Okay. So one of the ones that's really exciting and going to spend a little bit of time on is blood vessels and cells in fossils. This started with a scientist named Mary Schweitzer, from Montana State University. She is an old Earth Christian. Then she'd be a Christian, but she would hold to an old Earth perspective. I don't know much about her, but that's what I found in my research. There was a T-Rex bone from the 1990s, and there may have been some of this information in the 1990s, but the big deal was in 2005 that she took a T-Rex leg bone, dissolved the bone, and underneath it she found soft tissues. There were blood vessels, blood cells, and hemoglobin. Blood vessels, of course, are the tubes through which the blood flows. Blood cells are at the cellular level, so these are very small. Good evening, Lorraine. Those are the individual cells. Hemoglobin is the protein that gives blood its color. So those they found those three things. The blood vessels were still flexible. She got a lot of pushback. She was told absolutely positively this was ridiculous. Blood cells, blood vessels, hemoglobin do not survive for 66 million years. It has to be contamination. You obviously messed up. And so she went back and redid these studies repeatedly and with more careful procedures, to make sure that the critics couldn't complain. In 2007, so 2005 was the original blood vessels and hemoglobin. 2007 they found collagen, long stretches of collagen, actually 58% like chicken collagen, for whatever that means. 2009 they went for a hadrosaur. That's a duck. Is that like a duckbill? Is that right? Yeah, that's what I was remembering. They kind of have a build like a T-Rex, as in the big back legs and little teeny front ones, and they're upright, but their heads are totally different. They're a plant eater, and they tend to have the duckbill. It was one of those, and they found collagen, hemoglobin, elastin, and laminin. And these were 80 million year old dinosaur bones according to the evolutionary dating system. This was done with much more carefulness, and to make sure that there was no question that this was in fact soft tissue being found in dinosaur bones from the Jurassic era 80 million years ago according to their dating system. Today there are more than 100 examples. You can find these on Answers in Genesis website. Calvin Smith did an article on soft tissue. You can find a whole list of 100 different examples. As of 2019, there were 85 reports. So this was a different article that I found. 85 reports as of 2019 from 9 different phylum, 2 different classes of mollusks, 4 classes of vertebrates, mammals, birds, amphibians, and reptiles, many different environments. diversity geographically on every continent except for Antarctica and Australia, and the entire geologic column from Precambrian to Cenozoic. They're finding these soft tissues. So it's getting to the point where they're really struggling to explain it. These things are dating from 500 million years ago and later, so 500,000 years ago. And the point is, it shouldn't be. There is no way soft tissue can survive for millions of years. Young Earth creationists are surprised that we're finding soft tissue that's 4,500 years old. Scientists wouldn't have predicted you could find soft tissue 4,500 years old, much less 60, 80, 500 million years old. Stevie, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I looked up just to see what would pop up, and I found a more recent article. I think it was 2025, but it did have a quote from Mary Schweitzer in it.
Okay.
And they were using a new system called resonance Raman spectroscopy, which uses lasers to basically like read the fingerprints of molecules, which allows them to filter out for contamination and make sure that these were actual from the fossil directly.
Okay.
They used it on a T-Rex and a Brachycephalosaurus bones.
Okay.
To do some studies, but it was interesting from their perspective. Did you come across the idea of goethite in your studies of this?
I don't know if I have on that particular one. Go ahead.
It's an iron oxide that forms around bioorganic material.
Okay.
The theory from the people writing the article were older, so they just assumed that there must be some method of preservation, and their idea was that it bonds to this iron oxide, and that's what preserves the biological material.
I've heard iron oxide. I did not the goethite term, but the iron oxide.
So that seems to be the current theory from an old Earth perspective.
And this is a good example of why scientific evidence is an issue. Thank you, Stevie, for bringing that in, because as a young Earth creationist, we see this and go, yay, look at this. This is really good evidence that these bones are young. These are soft tissues. Everybody agrees they shouldn't have been able to survive for millions of years. Good evidence that they are young. The old Earth evolutionists the old Earthers will look at it and go, well, they're obviously millions of years old. It did survive. Now let's come up with an explanation to explain how it could have survived. And pretty much at that point, any explanation is pretty good because, well, it's here. There has to be an explanation. The date is unquestioned. The existence is now clear. So now we have to come up with an explanation of how it can survive. And so the iron oxide is one of the things that has been suggested as a possibility. No, I don't think they've actually gotten any DNA, at least not in any significant quantities. I will just say that that even if they did, which is a possibility, I'm not going to count it out, it would be degraded enough that it would be impossible to do, say, genetic cloning of dinosaurs, because even if it survived, it wouldn't be an original form, it would be corrupted. So it is possible that they could find DNA remnants. Like I said, I wouldn't count that out, but it wouldn't be sufficient to do like genome testing or, anything like that. That's a good question. Any other thoughts, Stevie, before we move on?
I'd just say it's good to continue to do tests and observe it to see what's going on. If it's
Right.
science, steel man your opponent, and
Absolutely.
see what the best they can come up with.
I haven't heard young Earth creationists respond seriously to the iron oxide argument. It's possible there's an article out there and I haven't seen it because I don't keep up with every single thing. But you're right, we do need to continue to look into it because at this point there's been enough evidence that that the soft tissue is clearly real, but the explanation still is up for debate. Okay, another one that is interesting is the Earth's magnetism. Of course, the Earth is a very large magnet. We have a North Pole and a South Pole. Irrelevant, but the North and South magnetic poles are not at the North and South geographic poles. So the closer you get to the North Pole, either one, the further your compass is going to point away from geographic North Pole and point towards magnetic North Pole. So if you happen to be in the Arctic or the Antarctic in the near future, consider that.
When you're doing aircraft navigation, you have to track how far the magnetic deviation is off for
Oh.
wherever you're flying. So if you're doing old school
Okay.
navigation on a map and stuff.
Okay,
With
that
a
makes
map and compass. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to say most people probably are not as precise as what an airplane has to be with the directions. The evidence is that the magnetic field of the Earth is decreasing. I don't think that's a highly controversial. I think that's pretty well accepted that it is in fact decreasing. There's also evidence in the rock layers that the magnetic field has actually reversed in the past, and possibly very rapidly. And so that brings up a lot of questions about where the magnetic field comes from. And in my physical science class at AWC, I often do cover the issue of what causes the magnetic field, what theory is correct, etc. So some of that is still up in the air. Even among young Earth creationists, the total explanation for some of the magnetic reversals, particularly, is debated. But if you just take it at face value that the magnetic field of the Earth is decreasing, they indicate that the Earth couldn't be more than about 10,000 years old, because if you go back more than 10,000 years, the magnetic field would become stronger and stronger and stronger until it actually would affect life and would make life impossible. You might not think about a strong magnetic field being dangerous, but when you get it strong enough, it does have impacts on biology. Stevie, you had some thoughts on this?
Yes. I found an old article from 1983 of evolutionists responding to the creation scientists who first discovered it, I believe in like the 70s.
Okay.
Dismissing the evidence for it. But that was older evidence, like the reversing and flipping was all later, newer evidence about it. But I did find another article that scientists are genuinely concerned about the decay in the magnetic field, that it's going to get to the point where it will no longer protect the Earth properly.
Yes.
And I think there's a place over South America that's especially weak. And I think that's where some of the caves where they were doing some of the research into the the layers and found evidence was in that area.
Okay. Yes, he did mention this. The magnetic field does protect us from solar radiation, the Van Allen belts, if I remember correctly. And that also is connected to the Aurora Borealis, if I remember correctly, the Northern Lights.
Yeah.
So the magnetic field does protect us. So the fact that it's decaying does mean that I don't know what the numbers are.
I don't remember what the range was.
100,000 years, million
right,
years,
it could
something
be
like
quite
that.
a while.
But it would stop protecting us from solar radiation, and that could be a serious issue. That also does mean that possibly pre-flood, the magnetic field was stronger, which would have given us more protection from some solar radiation, which might have relevance to health before the flood. But I'm not an expert, so I can't say too much about that. I will mention the reversals. The other place that they found reversals is in the Pacific floor, in igneous rock. And the reason, there's iron in the igneous rock, and because the igneous rock is liquid at that point when it's forming, before it forms rock, it's liquid, the iron will line up with the magnetic fields, and it actually switches inside a single rock layer. So while that rock was cooling, the magnetic fields flipped from north to south during that cooling process, which only can take a short time, relatively speaking, geologically speaking. So that's where the rapid reversal evidence comes from. So it's a little bit of inference, which a lot of science is, especially when you're dealing with the past. Anytime you're dealing with historical science as opposed to operational, there's inferences involved, and that's one of them. Okay, anything else on magnetism?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't know if you all knew this, but the moon is breaking up with us. It is very slowly backing out the door. The moon recedes away from the Earth at about 4 centimeters per year. So some of you, if you think that when you were a child the moon was bigger than it currently looks, you may be right, depending on when you were a child. No, 4 centimeters per year doesn't sound like very much, and it's not. Um, but I and the reason this happens is um, because of the interaction of the moon and the Earth. Our gravities interact with each other, which actually creates a form of friction, which slows down the moon, which makes the moon move further from the Earth. Um,
It's like it lags behind the rotation, and so it slowly gets further and further away.
Correct. Yes, because it's losing kinetic energy, and then that forces it into a more distant orbit. Yes. Now, like I said, 4 centimeters per year isn't very much, but if you go back 1.37 billion years, the moon would be skimming the Earth's surface. Obviously, that doesn't put an age of the Earth at 1.37 billion years, simply because the Earth would have massive problems long before it got that close. As you go back in time and the moon gets closer and closer to Earth, the tides become pretty significant. You can get to a point where the tides are covering the continents like each day, twice a day. At some point, the moon and the Earth would literally rip each other apart because of their motion and their gravity and so forth. So this puts a limit on the age of the Earth. So even if you go with an absolute maximum 1.37 billion, which puts the moon on the Earth's surface, that's only about a third of what they're predicting for the Earth's life. Moon is the same age as the Earth, or at least very similar. It would depend a little bit on where the moon came from. There are several theories, none of which work, for where the moon came from. But generally, the moon is considered to be similar age to the Earth, and it simply can't be. Stevie.
One article I found was saying that in the past, the days of the Earth were shorter because the moon was closer.
Okay.
And I don't know, that seemed like sort of an explanation. The article did not seem worried about the moon being too close in the past. So I don't know what that says about when they think it forms and etc.
Yeah.
But one thing is, the moon may be breaking up with us, but don't worry, it will stop drifting away at some point and become tidally locked. So the same side of the Earth always faces the moon. But before that point, the sun will boil away the oceans and become so large it will consume both of the orbits. So we don't need to worry about that either.
It is really funny when you get
so when you extrapolate into the future, the moon will eventually stop drifting away.
But by that point, the sun will have expanded.
Supernova and destroyed.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't have to worry about either of those things.
Yeah. Astronomers worry about disasters which will not occur for billions of years. And
Well, this might be like 100,000 years.
oh, okay. I didn't realize supernova was that soon.
Well, not supernova, it would become a red giant, which is big enough to
Right.
overlap the
Oh,
Earth's
right.
orbit.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I didn't even realize that was that soon. Okay. Carbon-14 in diamonds. This one is actually kind of neat. We've kind of touched on a number of things, and we chose a couple of different things. We talked about fossils. We did two that deal with specifically the Earth as a planet. This one deals with radiometric dating. So we're kind of hitting a variety of topics, not necessarily thematically. The radiometric dating was really investigated by a group called the RATE Project, Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth. It was an inter-group study. ICR, AIG, I think AIG was involved, CRSQ, the Creation Research Science Quarterly. A number of these guys came together. It was about 6 or 7 scientists who worked together on this project investigating the radioisotopes and the age of the Earth. And they published 2 huge books that are really good for keeping doors closed. But Dr. Vardaman told me, he was actually editor and chairman of the committee, and he told me if you don't publish a scientific book that's at least that thick, they just assume it's not good science. They also published a much smaller, Dr. DeYoung paraphrased it down to the layman's terms and published a book. It's called Thousands, Not Millions. They did a number of different things, and I'm going to share another one with you later, but right now, one of the things they did was to look at carbon-14. Carbon-14 dating, sometimes people will say, carbon-14 proves that dinosaurs are millions of years old. Silly, because carbon-14 doesn't last that long. I didn't put the number down. I believe it's 100,000 years. Do you have that number?
What is?
How long carbon-14 can survive?
I'm not sure. I think the half-life is like 5,700.
Yeah, the half-life is 5,700, which means that the actual, okay, it's like about 100,000 years, I think, is like all carbon-14 will be, all traceable carbon-14 will be gone. So when you're dealing with carbon-14, you can use it for archaeology, but really not for paleontology. If you're trying to prove that even the earliest humans are going to be right at the end of the range where you can actually use carbon-14. So carbon-14 does not last as long as it sometimes sounds like in popular conversation. But even dates of 100,000 years are inconsistent with Scripture. Diamonds, according to most evolutionary theories, are between 1 and 3 billion years old. They are brought up from the depths of the earth, and they are considered to be 1 to 3 billion years old. And I just realized my notes say it's a million years. I had it in words and not numbers, and I didn't see it a second ago. It says a million years, so I said 100,000. I was off by a factor of 10. That's still a long way from 1 to 3 billion. So if you examine a diamond, you should not find carbon-14. They did. They sent diamonds to the lab. They investigated them, and they found carbon-14. Not a lot of carbon-14, but they did find carbon-14. That indicates that they're not 1 to 3 billion years old, or it indicates that we don't understand carbon-14 decay, which, if in either case it counters any kind of carbon-14 dating that you have seen anywhere. Now there's other reasons why we have issues as creationists with radioisotope dating, but this is a specific one with carbon-14. This investigation in diamonds. Either diamonds are not billions of years old, or carbon-14 decays differently than what it does currently, or both, and probably both. What did you have?
Well, I found, this is not a scientific paper, but there was a blog post with research and notes from June 5th, 2025, discussing carbon-14 and the age of the Earth. Carbon-14 is also in the atmosphere.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
But the sun's, I think, radiation produces more carbon-14.
Okay.
So it being there is not a surprise. That's a normal process of it being renewed in the atmosphere. So this person was theorizing that this happens in the Earth as well because of the natural radiation from radioactive isotopes creates more carbon-14 in diamonds over time as well. And that was his possible explanation as to why it continues to show up even after millions of years.
Which takes us back to the issue that the data isn't evident. The data isn't proof. One of the things that you don't want to ever say is, this piece of scientific evidence proves the Bible, proves creation. Unfortunately, it simply doesn't work that way. The evidence is there. So carbon-14 is in the diamonds. That's accepted. Both sides are going to accept it. The young Earth creationists expected it. The old Earth creationists / evolutionists did not expect it. It's there. And so what you have to do is to give an explanation. Young Earth creationists have a couple of different aspects to it, one of them being that the Earth is not old. The evolutionists then come up with an explanation. Oh, here's why there's carbon-14 still in the diamonds. Let me just quickly say what Stevie said about it being in the air. That's correct. Because it's in the air, that's how it gets into all living things. Plants included in sugars. Carbon-12 and carbon-14 are both included in sugars. As long as you are alive, you are interacting with the environment. Plants take in the carbon-14, animals take in the plants, humans take in both the plants and the animals, etc. So we're getting carbon-14 constantly renewed in our bodies. When you die, or when an organism dies, it stops interacting with the environment. The carbon-14 converts to nitrogen-14. And so the carbon-14 decays away, the carbon-12 stays the same. So the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 changes as the carbon-14 turns into nitrogen-14. And what I understood, what Stevie said, that article was arguing that the sun, because it produces carbon-14 in the atmosphere, might also do so in the ground.
natural
Oh, just a natural
radiation
process.
from like uranium and other natural
Okay.
radioactive isotopes
Oh, okay.
might produce it in the Earth.
Okay. And that would then produce,
That's
that
their
would,
idea. Yeah.
that would restore the carbon-14 that's from going, the carbon-14 turns to nitrogen-14, and something else, maybe the nitrogen-14 gets converted back into carbon-14 through a radiation process. I don't know enough about it to analyze the article, so.
Right.
But anyway, so again, there's always an explanation. The fact is, though, and we'll come back next week and we'll do some more. What all of this tells us is it is completely scientifically acceptable to be a young Earth creationist. There is scientific evidence that is clearly consistent with a young Earth and is best explained with a young Earth. There is an old Earth explanation, but the easiest explanation is a young Earth explanation. So we'll talk next week about some more. Stevie, any closing thoughts?
I mean, none of their explanations are like foolproof either. There's still theories,
Right.
and interpretation. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Further research required, I guess.
Right.
Pretty much.
And in some ways, it will always be a matter of he said, she said. Each side has their explanation. But it is something for, as a if you're trying to be as neutral as possible, you look at the explanations and go, is this sound like a good explanation? Or does this sound very much like somebody just made up something out of desperation? Some arguments are better than others.
Also, the cumulative case is important to think about. We
Yep.
only covered 4 arguments. You only have like 8 or 9, but there's listed like 50. So there's a lot of things indicating a young Earth
Right.
to look at. So a cumulative case is always important to look at.
That is correct, and that's one reason I mentioned there's over 100. With the fossils, that's what. But there are lists of 50 to 100 different young Earth scientific arguments, some of which are fairly boring, which is why I don't talk about them. But they're still there. They're scientifically sound. It's this chemical and that chemical and the other chemical, and they're not, some of them are more interesting than others. Okay, well, I think that will do it for this evening. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Stevie, for co-hosting with me and for letting me use your table.
No problem.
And we'll see you back here next Saturday night, and we'll talk about some more scientific evidence. Have a good Sunday tomorrow. There's a lag, so.